Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this webinar that will be centered around hurricane preparedness. Please allow me to introduce myself. My name is Regan Maroc. I serve as Vice President for ACAM in Florida. Today with me is Doug Weinstein, who is our Vice President of Operations. Doug, if you'd like to say a couple words.
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody, to all our participants, and welcome. And I just wanted to remind everybody that the information that we're going to be discussing today is in a generic form. So things will have to be tailored differently for your particular association, property, amenities, anything along those lines. But we're going to be approaching this as just more of a general information that you can then take back and apply to your particular situation.
Thank you, Doug. And I just, for housekeeping purposes, if you have any questions, if you could please type them into the Q&A box, we will certainly, it would be our pleasure to answer them. Please do not use the raise hand function. With that, we'd like to get right into it. As is with anything, communication is a major factor with hurricane preparedness, prior to the hurricane, during the hurricane, and after the hurricane. And a major element of that is really knowing who's in your building, having all of their contact information, cell phones, emails, doing your best to have those lists completely up to date. Renters, owners, it doesn't matter. Prior, it's important that in this instance, it's okay to over communicate. This means letting the residents of your building know how things are transpiring with the hurricane. Basically, any suggestions, any advisories that are coming out from the local authorities, anything that is pertinent to the planning of the residents of your building. It is also important, and it is a common thing to advise your residents of, we call the go bag, and making sure that they have all of the critical essential items such as batteries and water, more recently walkie-talkies, having everything so that, God forbid the worst happens, they do have supplies, for the hurricane. So with that, I'm going to be switching over more into a moderating role. We're very privileged to have Doug Weinstein, who has been through a hurricane or two in his time. And we're going to be talking about preparing your property. Doug, please tell everyone how long you've been with ACAM. I don't like to age you, but it's certainly
it's a tad over 30 years. So I've been a veteran of many a hurricane in my day. And thank you, Regan, for doing it. So we're going to basically start with preparing your property. As you know, hurricane season runs from June 1 to November 30th in the Atlantic Basin. And during that time, the most active months are usually the last half of August into September and pretty much into the middle of October before it starts to wane down again for the remainder. But our job as building managers starts way before that June 1 deadline or that June 1 start. And what we do is we do a number of things. One of the things is way before that hurricane season, we start to gather any updated information that we want to share with you as residents. We put out a hurricane preparedness handbook every year to the residents of the associations. That's updated every year. Things may have changed. There may have been some redone on an amenity, something that may happen during the year that we would have to cover again. So we get that out to residents very early in the process. We're talking, you want to get that out March, because people start to go back. For those residents that use their Florida residence as a part-time, they do, a lot of them leave the end of March, beginning of April. And what we want to do is part of preparing the building or preparing the association for the hurricane season is to make sure residents do certain things before they go back up north or wherever they're going for the summer and the season. So things such as clearing everything off your balcony, securing your shutters if applicable, putting water socks in door sills, to protect water infiltration from sliders. All of that things are in that hurricane preparedness. And now let's go to a couple of things that we also do behind the scenes that you as members are not going to be aware of. Very early in the process, we start going out to our essential vendors. People don't realize that one of the most essential vendor in a hurricane season is your landscaper. You want to talk about with your landscaping company in terms of response after the storm. Most probably you're going to have, downed landscaping, downed trees that may have to be cleared off of parking lots, driveways, things such as that. So getting them ready and getting them in a response mode for when that storm actually happens. Same thing with your critical service providers, i.e. your elevator service company, which is going to be required to come into that building if we need to do a mandatory evacuation, which we'll cover a little later in the webinar. But things such as the generator service company, and you want to get all of them coming in before hurricane season, doing a check. What we do is a pre-hurricane walkthrough with these specific vendors. So to make sure that everything's ready and operational for the season. We also recommend that your property undergo a visual intake prior to the start of hurricane season. By that we mean either a photographic or a videographic record of your entire property. Everything from landscape to the building structure to the common areas, amenities, rooftop, mechanical rooms, and and this should be done every year on an annual basis before season. And the reason you do that is you want a record of pre-hurricane condition, pre-hurricane, what the building looked like. And the reason this is so important is that if we do have a hurricane and your building has damage from that hurricane or from that tropical storm, because we must remember there can be damage from tropical storms as well as hurricanes. But you have a record for your insurance company of what the building looked like before, so that it is a lot easier to put forth your claim, and it's a lot easier for the various adjusters to reference what the building was like and how it has to be restored during the adjudication of that claim. The other thing that we make sure is that all of our property information, including your information as residents, i.e. your contact information, emergency contact information, is backed up and is stored and is very important, remotely accessible. Because one of the things that we are going to want to do is communicate with you during the pre-storm, the storm, and the post-storm. So we're able to do that with our IT systems that we have, where we'll be able to communicate. That can be either through a resident portal like a building link, which you may have at your property, amongst some others, or through a phone chain or an email chain that's established particularly for your association. So that is to make sure that all of that we have available to our management team off-site, that they can access it remotely. The other thing that we make sure that we do to you is communicate to you as members and as residents, what is your responsibility? We touched on it a little earlier, but as with terms of prepping your apartment, we also remind you of what to have in your go bag. We also remind you, again, the evacuation routes. And then as we get further towards the season and into the beginning of the season, as soon as the counties put out their evacuation plans and their shelter plans, we go into that as well. So it's a whole pre-hurricane season protocol that we go through before the season even starts. And as I say, it starts very, very early.
Thank you, Doug. And yeah, and that, as you and I were talking about the other day, it's very important for residents to keep in mind, that without electricity, you don't have Wi-Fi. So we've all become very accustomed to doing a lot from home, but at a macro level, if there's no electricity, everything else from your perspective is not going to be available. Okay, great. So,
and also to make sure, Regan, you bring up a very good point. Also to make sure that you as residents, it just have your information available to not only yourself, that you can either take with you or store somewhere in the cloud, like a Dropbox or a team or something along those lines, as well as give it to a family member who's, up north or wherever, so that they have that information. That information includes anything from, medical information with prescriptions to making sure that you have your insurance information, your insurance carrier, your broker, claim phone number, claim email department, that type of thing. So God forbid, if you need to file a claim or report damage, that it's not sitting on a piece of paper in the dining room into a building you can't get back into.
Absolutely, Doug. Okay, so transitioning now into the mandatory evacuations. I know there's always confusion with residents as to at what point is it not simply your decision, but it becomes the decision of the governing authorities, and it's not a choice anymore. How does this usually go down, and how should it be communicated to the residents?
Sure, absolutely. One of the things, as everybody knows at this point, who've ever been through a hurricane season down here in South Florida, know that there's certain classes of hurricanes. There's, tropical disturbances, tropical storms, Cat 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and there is even a Cat 6. So what basically the municipality does is they look at the forecasting models of the storm. They look at the projected route of the storm. We happen to subscribe to a private forecasting service that is very helpful to us as we do our planning for each of the storms as they start coming up. And this service tracks it all the way coming across from the shores of Africa through the Lesser Antilles and then up into our area. So we have a lot of advance warning and a lot of advance protocols that they use in terms of tracking. So let's assume that the municipality orders a mandatory evacuation, and they will usually start ordering those when they see a potential wind threat of X number of miles per hour and above. And the reason I say that is there's a basic rule in place that when sustained wind gets to be about 35 and 40 miles per hour plus, that greatly inhibits the role of first responders. So in other words, if you need an ambulance, or if you're injured and it's a sustained wind of 40, 45 miles an hour, there's likelihood that first responder will not come out, will not answer the calls. So they look at that as a way to start, discussing when they should issue evacuation orders and where. An evacuation orders are issued from the coast going inland, and they have zones. So you may see an evacuation order for Boca Raton for zone 1, and then it may change to zone 2. That's why it's important for you as residents to know the zones. And we also offer those up as part of the hurricane prep for our memberships. So you want to get that. And please, one of the things, if you come away with anything from this webinar, is a mandatory evacuation means mandatory. Please leave. If the storm is projected to be strong enough that it carries a mandatory evacuation, please find shelter elsewhere. And the reason we say that is what is done from a building perspective when we have a mandatory evacuation. All of your main building systems are going to be discontinued and shut down. What does that mean? That means your elevators, your main HVAC systems, certain other mechanical components will be shut down for the length of this mandatory evacuation. We get a lot of pushback sometimes from residents and saying, well, why do you have to shut the elevators off? Okay. Well, the reason being is, as I mentioned before, is if we have, when you get into, heavy tropical storms or, Cat 1s and 2s, where the winds will go by that kind of benchmark of 35, 40, 45 miles an hour. God forbid you're in an elevator and the power goes out and the generator doesn't kick in, okay? Or you're in an elevator that is not on the generator's transfer system and you're stuck in that elevator. I hate to tell you, no one's coming to get you out because the service company won't respond. The building will be locked down. In other words, your staff will have evacuated too as part of the mandatory evacuation orders. And we as, employers and as, staff members have to comply with that mandatory evacuation. So you're not having services in the building. First responders are not going to be able to get to the building and free someone from an elevator, or God forbid, if you have a medical emergency in your unit, they're not going to be able to get to you. So that's why, please, I impress upon everybody and tell your residents when there is a mandatory evacuation order, please leave, find shelter. Brings up another point. Know where your shelters are and what type of shelter you need to go to. For instance, if you have pets, there's some shelters that accept pets, some shelters that don't accept pets. So you want to make sure that your pet, obviously you want your pet to go with you, that you go to a shelter that accepts pets, or you go, to a relative's house or what have you. It's very funny, Reagan, we get a lot of questions in some of the recent hurricanes where they've issued evacuation orders and then, people leave and let's say they go north or they go over to the West Coast, the storm makes an unexpected turn and they wind up going back. So unfortunately, you have to realize that a hurricane or any type of tropical storm or hurricane is very, very fickle. It can turn on a button. So, what was projected at 3 o'clock last Thursday when they issued that evacuation order may not be what you actually face. But again, please, if they do issue a mandatory evacuation, please do so. And we'll take care of your building as best we can.
Yeah, Doug, just to add to that, with regards to shelter or, in normal times, some people may say, I'm going to go to Georgia and stay in a hotel. With the current conditions, you might not feel comfortable still staying in a hotel. So think ahead about where it is that you would go, where you feel comfortable, just in the current circumstances. And Doug, it's funny you mentioned about, during Irma, I recall we opted to go to Orlando. And, when we got to Orlando, we realized, to your point, that it started heading towards Orlando. So, and that really brings us into the next phase of after the storm. Again, to the Irma example, right afterwards, my family, we came back down to South Florida. And I think we rushed too quickly to go home, only to find our electricity was still out. Even when the electricity, then the air conditioning, there were issues, and it really caused a lot of issues for us moving around. So what are your recommendations after the storm as far as planning on returning?
Reagan, that brings up a very good topic in the sense of we ask that our residents please do not return to the building until the building is habitable again. Okay, because unfortunately, you don't want to come back to a building that still has services discontinued or that is damaged. Okay, you don't want to have to sit in your apartment or your whatever townhome or what have you with no air conditioning, or if you live on the 12th floor, no elevator service. One of the things that I mentioned before that that your management company or your building should have remote capabilities to notify you as residents as to when to come back. What is the current situation of the building? Do we have power? Do we have elevators? Do we have air conditioning? Okay, are the roads blocked or are they not blocked? Okay, there's a lot of times if you're on a mandatory evacuation site, it's not controlled by us as to when you can come back, but by the municipality. they will block, and I'll give an example, all along the coast, they were blocking bridges where, the local law enforcement would not even let you across the bridge. Then they started letting residents across the bridge with identification. Brings up another point. Make sure you have all your identification with you wherever you may have gone, because you're going to need it to possibly get back to the area where your building is. But it's very important that you don't come back until the building's ready to accept residences again. And unfortunately, that may be for a while. Even if we had a mandatory evacuation, the storm missed us, or it was we didn't get hit as bad as we were going to get hit. And I'll give you a very good example of it. Let's take elevators. We shut down the elevators, okay? If it's a mandatory evacuation, and let's say we had a Cat 1 or a Cat 2 where we had potential water infiltration into an elevator motor room or into an elevator shaft, we're not going to turn those elevators back on until we have the elevator service come to the building and make sure they're ready to be turned back on. Or we don't want to turn something back on that is a danger or that could pose an entrapment issue if we run too early. Same things with HVAC systems. We need to inspect the building before we liven up our systems. We need to go up on the rooftops. We need to look at the cooling towers. We need to look at the machinery to make sure that they're able to function. And they may not be. I mean, God forbid if you have a Cat 3, Cat 4, with a big, with the winds that are associated with those storms. Storms, you have to realize, cause damage in a lot of different ways. People think of hurricanes and they think of water. Well, yes, water is very important, but wind is just as important or more so. And not only the amount of water that's falling from, the skies of the hurricane, but also the surge. If you're on a coastal building, a surge can be much more dangerous than the amount of rain or even wind, for that matter, depending upon the type of surge and how high that surge is. So again, we all caution residents, check with us. Please don't come back before we're ready to accept you, because it's not going to be fun for anybody, least of all you guys coming back to a building that is on, half its operating capability. So, that's something you want to do. You want to also make sure that when you come back, you may realize your apartment may have damage. Okay. We get a lot of questions a lot of times. Oh, I have impact windows. I'll stay. My apartment's fine. Nothing's going to happen to it. Well, unfortunately, impact doesn't mean waterproof. And, we get this all the time is someone say, well, my impact windows, I came back and I had water all over my apartment. Well, unfortunately, impact windows are called impact windows for a reason. They flex and move if something impacted them or a wind impacted them. So the seals are broken and water can enter into those units. There's a lot of ways for water to enter into a units aside from just, a window, sliding glass doors, caulking, that type of thing. So you want to make sure when you come back that you're prepared that there may be issues within your apartment. Again, that's why have all your information handy so that you can call your carriers, your brokers, make claims, whatever it is that you need to do to get your apartment back up and running. We will restore the building, okay, but we can't restore your individual units. So that's something you really have to be attuned into, that your apartment may have damage. Now, a lot of people have caretakers. If you have a caretaker that the building is now allowing people to come back in, and you have a caretaker and you're not planning on coming back, from the unit you've gone for the season, let's address that for the moment. You would want your caretaker to come to your apartment and survey what potential damage. The worst thing in the world for your neighbors is if you have damage in your apartment. Let's say you have water infiltration, broken windows, broken sliding glass doors, and you don't know about it, or there's water piling up in your apartment. You have your caretaker come back. We will ascertain damages as much as we can. But again, have your caretaker come in as soon as possible if you're not coming back, to assess potential damages that you might have suffered during the storm to your unit. Okay.
Okay.
So, that's basically, please let us work, and we'll let you know when you can come back and resume occupancy.
Perfect. Thank you, Doug. Yeah, no, you make a lot of great points there. At the end of the day, we first and foremost, we have everyone's safety in mind as the priority. All right, so it looks like we have a question here, Doug. Is there any special association with boat slips? So the question
Sure.
I guess refers to what you should do in the event, with the boats at the association.
Right. Good question. Basically, what will happen is most associations with boat slips don't have the functionality of a working marina. It's basically just a slip situation. They may have a clubhouse or whatever. So, in a marina, what typically happens is the marina will pull boats. Associations don't have the luxury of it. So the boat owner has a couple of options. One is they can take their boat to another location, where they may be able to be pulled out of the water, secured on land. But if not, and again, I'm just going to describe generic things that a boat owner can do. Depending upon the type of docks that the association has, whether they be floating or fixed, will really determine what you do to prepare your boat for a hurricane. And just that, boats are tied off differently during hurricanes. We call it like a spider web tying off. And we also look at, if it's a floating dock, okay, you want to make sure that your lines have enough play in them, bow lines, stern lines. You want to have they enough play that if you do have a surge, that it will ride the surge with those lines. If you have a fixed dock, that you want to make sure that there's, some movement with the fixed lines. So, that can also be taken into, of course. Again, I can't give you a particular instance, not knowing the situation that you have. But again, one of the things is that you have to realize that your boats are subject to probably the most part of a storm that's going to affect them is the surge. That you're going to have, things such as, then you have do you have a sailboat? Do you have a power boat with, de-rigging sails, masts, that type of thing? Do you take off your radar domes? Do you do this? Again, that's all really personal preference and what you're used to doing with the boat. Having been the boat owner for the Hurricane Sandy when I lived in New Jersey, my boat.
Doug.
Pardon me?
Condolences to owning a boat.
Yeah, yes, but unfortunately, my boat was pulled and was on dry dock and was covered with other boats because of the surge, but escaped unscathed, which you could say would either be fortunate or unfortunate. But again, you really have to look at your particular type of vessel, what type of dockage that you have, and things such as those lines. And also, again, very important, remove, critical items from your boat. We want to remove electronics, fish finders, depth finders, things such as that. These are expensive items that if your boat is damaged, at least you can have these back and to reinstall or what have you, down the line. So, and make sure that you have all your boat information is just as important as your unit information. Have your marine insurance carrier's number, that type of thing. And associations that have slips associated with them or have marina facilities will have certain protocols that a boat owner or a slip occupier will have to do. So again, generically, check with your association what they require you to do in preparation of it. But again, there's many things out there on the internet in terms of how to tie off lines, spider web tie offs, depending upon the type of dock. So unfortunately, it's something I can't get into particulars, but, there's a lot of information on the internet about how to secure
Well,
your
Doug,
craft.
you said it at the beginning. Obviously, management companies. I know we as a management company, we submit best practice checklists prior to hurricane season. But as you indicated, some properties have more boat slips. They have different setups. You have to make sure that your hurricane plan and preparedness is tailored specific to your property, and that should be done, prior to hurricane season. So with that, I think I see one more question here. And I think you touched on it already, Doug, but people obviously with it, if they have a service pet, in an evacuation scenario, what are some of the things that they should be thinking about as far as, making sure, making accommodations for their support dog or support
Sure,
animals?
absolutely. One of the things, Regan, is this is important for your pet. Depending upon, no matter what type of service animal it is number one, to also have your pet have a go bag as well. I mean, to prepare one from your pet, food, medication, any particular, extra collar, extra leash, things such as this that you would have with your animal. And one of the things too, as I said before, whether it's a service animal or just a pet, you want to make sure that wherever you're evacuating to will accept that service animal or that pet. Again, there are going to be shelters set up that will be pet friendly. So you'll want to, mark those that's where you'll want to go if you're not sheltering, privately or elsewhere. Also, what you might want to have, and this is for, and let's not even say a hurricane, let's say it's a tropical storm where, you're going to stay in your unit or whatever. What we also, we'll talk about is there's a bunch of calming medications or calming chews for pets out there that you may want to have handy. Some animals have never faced a hurricane or have faced a tropical storm and, may get scared and may, have, a bad reaction to that. So maybe a calming chew or something along those lines may be helpful. But again, you should prepare with your pet as the same way as you prepare with yourself. And again, medical records on your pet are very important to have saved in a cloud location or anywhere so where you can access them. Because God forbid your pet suffers an injury, they may need to know, what medications, what shots have been done, that type of thing.
Perfect. Well, with that, Doug, I think everyone has gained a lot of knowledge on this webinar. We're coming to the end now. We do suggest that if you have any further questions, that you reach out to myself or Doug. I can be reached at rmaroc@acam.com. Doug is dweinstein@acam.com. And we certainly will get back to you with answers to any questions that you may have. Thank you very much for joining us today. And Doug, a big thank you to you for sharing your knowledge with us.
And I just as a closing thing, Reagan, and thank you for the opportunity, and thank you again to our participants today's webinar. As you have read, this is projected to be a very active season, similar to last season. We anticipate a good amount of landfalls in the United States, particularly coastal landfalls or Gulf landfalls. So again, please track these storms. There's the best site is the National Hurricane Service, has a website where you can track storms from when they start tracking them themselves. And again, a lot of the local channels, will have storm tracker apps, which are very good that you can get on your Android or your iPhone. That, if you're away, you can still track them, as the cellular service, is fairly pretty, resistant. So you'll be able to track storm information up to the minute. But again, thank you for the opportunity, Reagan. And again, any questions that anybody may have, we'll be more than happy to impart our knowledge on those.
Thanks, Doug.